Hello and welcome to Pitch Masters, the show that aims to uncover and share everything that there is to know about the art and science of pitching. I'm your host, Danny Fontaine, and in this episode I speak to former CEO of Kin Carta, Jay Schwan. We have an incredibly candid talk about what being a CEO really involves. We discuss red and blue oceans, pitching to investors, choosing the right clients for your business, the importance of having a great mentor, and using the story from the movie 300 to motivate a team to success. Grab a coffee, sit back, and enjoy the show. Jay Schwan, what an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Great to see you. I'd like to ask, to kick us off, for you to give yourself a bit of an introduction.
Danny, good to see you. Congrats on the podcast. I've enjoyed listening to it and very happy to be here with you. Quick introduction. So I live here in Chicago. I've been in, career-wise, I've been in the tech services industry my entire career. You know, from a role as a software engineer where I started to entrepreneur and CEO and eventually a public company CEO, and now kind of starting a second chapter. Happily married, got 5 kids, 2 ridiculously large dogs, a house that's just a little bit on the right side of controlled chaos. But all is good. All is good.
Fantastic. And you're very humble as well. I've always thought that about you. You know, you just throw in there, oh yeah, and I was a CEO for a little bit. You were a CEO of a pretty big company. Tell us about that.
Well, I guess the kind of the last chapter, I was the CEO of Kin Carta, which is roughly 2,000 person digital transformation consultancy. So we kind of focus primarily in building software, bespoke software for companies, and helping them move bespoke mission critical software to the cloud. And that was a publicly traded company on the London Stock Exchange. So I spent the last 4 years building and growing that company, and it was a great experience. And before that, I had started a boutique software engineering consultancy called Solstice here in Chicago, and scaled that to roughly 400 people before selling it to what ultimately would become Kin Carta. So essentially sold it to a company and then became the CEO of that parent company, and we built Kin Carta. And we can kind of talk about a lot of those details and lessons learned, but it was great to be able to sit in the seat of startup entrepreneur, like scale up entrepreneur, and then public company CEO. I kind of saw a lot of different sides of these different capital structures and the different, demands on a CEO's time and how those responsibilities shifted. And it just gave me a great appreciation for the entrepreneurial journey. I just love hearing people's stories about it. I love hearing about the challenges. I can almost always empathize, having been in the chair for almost 25 years. I kind of feel the pains and the joys when people talk about it. And so now I'm really trying to move into that next chapter where I'm just giving back and, coaching and investing in startup tech services founders and helping them with their journeys.
Let's talk about being a CEO for a minute, because I guess in theory, anyone can be a CEO. You just start a company with one person and you're the CEO and founder, and that's all good. But being a CEO of a company on the FTSE, for example, is a different kettle of fish, something that most of us will never experience, something that probably fills a lot of people with dread. But if I was to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit, what does a CEO really do of a company of that size?
Yeah, I mean, well, the responsibilities shift a lot as a company scales. And, when it gets to that point and you're publicly traded, it's, the stakeholders shift. And so normally as a CEO, you kind of think about your main stakeholders as your clients and your employees. And that remains to be true. I mean, ultimately, those are those are the stakeholders that are going to make you successful. But as a public company CEO, you kind of get stakeholders like your public investors, your institutional investors, the people that buy the stock and ultimately determine how much it's worth and how much the company's worth, which has a lot of rippling effects on how people are incentivized at the business and how the company's viewed. There's regulatory bodies that you ultimately are a stakeholder to, and then just general kind of public persona and media and those sorts of things. So it kind of broadens a little bit, and so then the focus kind of broadens a little bit, and then how you're serving the company changes. And what it ultimately means, I think, from a responsibility standpoint, is you've got to just be absolutely sure you've got the right people in the right seats from an executive team standpoint, and the people that are actually operating the business day to day. Because as you kind of move into that seat, it's you have less time to be able to kind of help influence some of the decisions. And arguably you shouldn't have to. I mean, arguably you want to have leaders that you respect and that you are comfortable holding accountable, and that you're there to kind of coach and guide and support, but ultimately they own whatever portion of the business they're responsible for. So getting the right butts in the right seats is like job one. And then if you've got that, then you can do all these other things, hopefully effectively.
And what are the other things then? So you've got this great team around you, so that finance is under control, and everything you're doing is legal and compliant. What do you do then? Do you sit behind a big desk and direct?
Oh, if it would only be that easy, Danny. I think different people have different philosophies. And there's, a scale of like how operationally involved the CEO gets in the business, right? And so different leaders will take different approaches to that. I have always been under the mindset that I'm going to create an organizational structure that's distributed and that allows decisions to be made as close to the ground as possible, where they actually have the most influence. And you need to have, some sort of oversight function or executive team that is looking at that and making sure that, that nothing's going off the rails. But for me, what it ultimately means is like, I just kind of look for where the constraint of the business is, from an operational standpoint, because there's always a constraint. It's just, I'm an engineer, believe in the systems of constraints, there's always a constraint that's governing the growth of the system. And in tech and services companies, tech services agencies, consultancies, it's usually either sales, it's talent, or it's something operational. And so, depending on the region and depending on that constraint, I won't swoop in to try to solve the problem, but I'll make sure that whoever is responsible for that area has all of the support of the business that they need to be able to remove that constraint or work through it. And, my leadership philosophy is to make sure that the rest of the team always understands where the constraint is. And then they've got two jobs, whatever their job is, and then also to help the person that's responsible for that constraint. That's their other job. And so I think, that to me has always worked well. I think it scales well. And it also continues to give those people that are responsible for the areas, like they're still in control, they're still accountable. Now they just got some added support and maybe a little bit of extra initiative to kind of get, okay, we got to get through this so we can get, so Jay stops asking us questions and, it is out of our house for a little bit. But at the end of the day, that, the company has to be able to run itself. It can't rely on one person to do everything.
Did you have, when St. Ives said, we want you to be the CEO, did you have any kind of imposter syndrome at that point?
100%. It was funny. Yeah. So just to kind of give the quick backstory, Solstice, the firm that I founded and scaled, I sold it to a British listed company that was at the time called St. Ives. St. Ives was going through its own transformation. It was historically a printing company and printed all the Harry Potter books and a bunch of magazines and promotional materials, like pretty well-known global printer. But they had started a journey a few years prior where they're like, okay, print is in the future for us. We're going to start selling all these printing companies. We're going to start buying consultancies and agencies, and with a digital kind of tilt in terms of their focus. So we were their first U.S. acquisition, and they bought about 10 other firms, and they sold like all the print stuff. This all kind of happened like right as when our firm got bought, and then kind of like the tail end of our earnout, my predecessor had kind of finished selling all the print stuff, and we had this basket of companies. So just ironically, when kind of our earnout completed in 2018, my predecessor, Matt Armitage, made the decision that he was going to step down as CEO. And the board tapped me on the shoulder and said, would you be interested in taking this job? And my first immediate reaction was, no, like I don't know anything about running a publicly traded company. It was clear I needed to move to London in order to do the job effectively. It was completely out of my comfort zone. But on the same sense, I was also kind of feeling lost. Like, okay, I just finished this earnout. It was successful. We had a great successful run. I'm like, what am I going to do next? And so I was really at this crossroads. And so I went and talked to my wife about it. I'm like, you'll never believe this conversation I had with the chairman today. Asked if I'd be interested in the CEO job and move to London. Like, could you believe that? And she's like, yeah, like, let's go.
Wow.
I'm like, really? She was like, yeah, this is like exactly what you need. Like, it'd be a great experience for the family. Like, we absolutely should do this. And it was really her conviction that convinced me that, like, one, I could do it, and two, I should do it. And because just whenever you take those leaps, it just really helps to have that partner and that support system. And I've always looked at my career as like shared with her. Like, she gave up her career as an optometrist, so she could help raise our kids and just like do like everything, frankly. I mean, not that I'm not involved, but she's just a champion at just managing our family. And so I could focus on, growing the business. And so anyway, her support definitely helped me take that leap. But then getting over there, and diving in, and, the first thing they did was just kind of saddle me with all these advisors, all these advisors. And I'm just like, and then, you start getting like different messages and suggestions from these different people. And I swear, like a year in, I'm just looking at these guys going, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. I mean, it's like not that they're like not coming from a well-meaning place, but none of them sat in the seat that I was sitting in and before, and they all had their own agendas in terms of what they wanted to see happen and why. And so, once I kind of figured out the game, and just like everything else, it's a game. I'm like, this isn't that complicated. In some ways, it was like these guys' jobs to make it more complicated than it was. So after removing a lot of that noise, it definitely got a lot easier, and then it was just me and my team doing the work that we knew we needed to do and telling the story the way that we knew it needed to be told. And things definitely got easier from that point forward.
What was the hardest thing, do you think?
Well, for this particular journey, what I didn't know when I took the job is, I inherited this portfolio of businesses. Basically, it was, 11 different companies that had been purchased over the course of 6 or 7 years. And when I got in there and started to look at them all, basically 9 of them were shrinking or losing money. And 2 of them were doing pretty well. So Solstice, the company that I came from, was doing well. And then another similar kind of software engineering consultancy was doing well. But the other 9 were not. And really, of those 9, like 7 of them were not fit for what ultimately I felt the firm should turn into, which is Kin Carta, which is a pure play kind of, digital engineering consultancy. So that meant that we had to kind of look at those 7 companies, figure out how to restructure them in a way that would allow them to start growing so we could just sell them, like just rebuild them just so we could get rid of them. because they weren't necessarily part of the future, and no one's going to buy, a services company that's shrinking, and definitely no one's going to buy a service company that's losing money. So taking the four firms that we knew were part of the future and integrating those, and restructuring and selling the other seven, I think if I had more experience, I probably would have never taken on that challenge. But my ignorance and I don't know, just entrepreneurial, maybe it's a little bit of ego, was just we can do this. And so, I laid down the strategy and got buy-in from, I wouldn't say everyone, because, a lot of it meant some of these firms weren't necessarily part of the future, but from all the folks that really mattered in terms of going, the go forward plan. But it was tough. I mean, it was tough. It was a big undertaking to get those businesses where they needed to be, and then integrate the other ones. But we did it, and so it was a slog for, I would say, almost 2 years of, just a lot of kind of in-depth work to kind of figure out what each business needed, and then what our go forward business strategy needed to be. And so I wasn't in a position at that point where I could just be like, let me know how it's going, where's the constraint? The constraints were everywhere, across every business. So I was in a lot of the details. And so it was tough. I was definitely I was worn down by the end of it, but we got through it. And I'm so glad we did it, because one of the reasons I took the job was I was a little concerned about the future of the company. And I'm like, man, I felt like I built this great business with these great people, and then we sold it. And now I'm not really confident that it's in the right place for the future. And so once we got through that, I was felt really good about the future. So anyway, long-winded answer, but that was probably the most difficult time.
And if serendipitously someone's listening to this and they've got offered a role as CEO and they're thinking, yeah, I think I might take it, what advice would you give them?
You've got to be really clear what you're walking into, and make sure you're up for whatever that challenge is. Because I really thought that I was walking into a growth and scale, opportunity. Okay, things are going great. I'm going to move to this seat and then have more control to make things even more great. What I didn't realize that it was really a turnaround job. And a turnaround job, it means restructuring businesses. It means laying people off. It means all the things that I had never done, never wanted to do, just wasn't part of my DNA. I'm just not there's people that are just really good and at just doing that, going in, restructuring businesses, leaning them down, getting them, whatever it is. I mean, and it's necessary. A lot of times, these firms needed it, because it's if you're carrying too much weight and you can't move because you're just by the burden of the weight you're carrying, you're done. I mean, so it's a job to be done. And I think you just need to be really clear on what that job to be done is. Once I took it, I knew, okay, well, I got to do this job because I took the job, and now I need to get it to the point where it's the job that I actually wanted. So we need to get through all that. And then we did. And then the last few years, it was great. You're growing 30, 40%. And it was just, we're just humming, and you could just watch the employee engagement scores start taking off as the firm kind of found its footing and started to do what it was meant to do. So all of that was very rewarding, but I would just say whoever's taken, when you're walking into a CEO job, usually it's not a great situation, because if it was, then the old CEO would still be running it. Right. I mean, unless it's some great planned, succession, of someone retiring or something. But usually there's some work to do, and you should just be really clear on what that is.
And I'm guessing that as much as the role is internally facing, it is externally facing as well. And you mentioned a minute ago that, you spent time with your team to get that story right over the kind of months. Talk to me a little bit about that story and how you wrote it And who it was for?
It was for everyone in terms of like, we needed everyone to understand where we were going as a business, and that the future was going to look very different than the present. And so, the three main audiences from my perspective were employees first, clients second, and then investors. And it was very important to me that we were telling the same story to all three of those audiences. There was different proof points, maybe, and different data that maybe those individual audiences would care about, but it needed to be consistent because we were coming from a point where St. Ives, which had been a listed company since the 80s, it had been around for a long time. But as it was going through this transition, from print into buying these consultancies and agencies, it was a really difficult time from a public listing standpoint, because, and I still, I really admire my predecessor for having the guts to do this, because if he didn't, who knows where this company would have ended up. But he basically said, okay, we're going to make this, it's like, we're going to make this transition. We're going to buy these digital consultancies and agencies. We're going to sell this print stuff. And then the whole time he's got to report, the earnings of the business, and forecast it out, years in advance, while you're completely changing it, which is not easy to do. In fact, it's impossible, so it's like, putting on a Broadway show and inviting everyone to the first week of rehearsals. Like, it's just ugly.
Right.
It's just not going to look good. And it didn't, it's like, it didn't look good. So by the time I took it over, the stock was in the tank. The investor confidence was had waned. It was almost to the point where it was like kind of a joke, because so many promises had been made and we just couldn't fulfill them in the time period that ideally the investors wanted. So when I took over, it was the main thing that I was dealing with from an investor standpoint was skepticism. And there was definitely that from the employees as well. But, employees could be a little bit more optimistic, right? They're not going to stick around if they don't believe that, where we're going makes sense. Now, whether or not they believe we can get there in the time period we're saying all that stuff, everyone's got to take that journey individually. But investors ultimately determine how much the company's worth. So I thought coming in, I'm like, you know what? We're going to put this vision together and put this deck together. And we're going to go out there and we're going to be like, we're going to be a digital transformation consultancy. Look at these other digital transformation consultancies. Look at the multiples they're trading at. Look at this market. It's growing at 25% a year. Like, this is where we're going. Like, isn't this great? And, I was not rudely. I was very abruptly introduced to British realism.
Right.
And British realism is very different than uneducated American optimism, which I was used to. So I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to tell the story, and the stock's going to take off, and we're going to have access to all the resources and the capital and the support to do what we need to do. What we got was, good idea. Like, show me that you can do it, and then I'll give you credit for it. And so, nobody is necessarily going to pay up for the stock, right? If until they see that it's actually creating the earnings that it's potentially good. At least no one in that market. Not with the history that we were carrying. So what I didn't realize, and this kind of goes to I think the pitch master kind of parallel here, is a big part of my job as CEO was pitching the business to investors. Every time we had a earnings release, which is twice a year, it was coupled with an investor roadshow where we would go and basically pitch the company to 30 plus different institutional investors, or usually mutual funds. So the fund managers that run these mutual funds, in hopes that they would be interested in then buying the stock. And I learned pretty quickly, it's not that much different than pitching to clients.
Right.
It really isn't. A lot of the principles are the same. A lot of understanding who your audience is, understanding what they care about. When they ask you a question, trying to interpret what's the actual question that they're asking, because it's never the question they're asking, it's the question behind the question that they're asking. Who are the different influencers within, that particular institution that determines if they make an investment, what's their typical timeline for making those investments? How often do we need to get in touch with them to try to accelerate that timeline? I mean, a lot of these things were the same. And so I appreciated kind of growing up and like as a CEO, your number one job is selling. I mean, I firmly believe that. Just the audience changes over time, but investors were very much like that. So we had a lot of educating to do in terms of helping them understand what we were trying to become and what it was, because a lot of them didn't even know or understand what a tech services company was. And then we had to convince them that we were going to get there. And over time we did. The register completely flipped from, printing income-based investors to growth investors. And then the stock price kind of followed and it was a successful outcome.
And I'm guessing your pitch then, which you probably did many times over to these investors, evolved over the years, right? Over a time period. I wonder if you're able to put your finger on some of the things within that pitch that had a big impact.
Yeah. So early on, what I realized resonated the most with these investors were the case studies, were the stories. And I didn't think that at first. I just had them in the back of the deck as like, oh yeah, and like, we built this app for this company and it does these crazy things. And we built this software for this, company, and look at how it's improved their business. And what I found in the conversations that I was having with them is those were the things that they were actually most interested in, because it helped them crystallize and understand what it is that we did, why it was important, and what the actual market opportunity was in like tangible examples. And so I went from market data and, all these kind of like charts and graphs showing the industry and the sector and the growth and where we fit and all these things. And then kind of came back to like, okay, well, actually, I'm going to spend most of my time I'm going to tell 3 or 4 stories. And we'll do the financial charts in the beginning, and I'll have my CFO do that, and he'll do those quickly. And I'm going to come in and tell 3 or 4 stories, and they're great stories, really interesting case studies. And all of a sudden, then people started paying attention. Like, oh man, did you see what these guys did for John Deere? Did you guys see what these guys are, doing for this bank and that bank? And like, that's crazy. Oh, I didn't know they built that. Like, I use that. It's like all of a sudden it started to become real to them. And that's when we started to get a lot of interest and requests for more meetings and those sorts of things, because the stories are just easier for people to pass along, And
what were the most powerful stories? Were they just the ones that had, the biggest numbers attached to them, or did you find that there were stories that maybe were more emotional or had more of a human aspect? What was it, do you think, that made the stories themselves compelling?
Yeah, it was the stories where there was like advanced technology at play making a big impact on a business. I mean, I think one of my favorite examples was the work that we were doing, continue to do with a business called Corteva, which is a spin out of Dow DuPont. They do seed sales. So they sell seeds to farmers.
Right. And
they started an initiative that's like, we want to own the software experience for the farmer. So they commissioned us basically to help build a suite of tools that would help farmers, predict the yields of their crops and understand in real time what the health of the crops were. And we were doing like really cool stuff with like machine visioning and drones flying over the fields and, capture, analyzing the images to determine like where they may need to put more fertilizer down, or where things were maybe crops were a little bit more dehydrated, and then used all this to help them predict yields, which allowed them to like make better financial decisions, all these things that made a huge impact on their business. And then also like protected their seed sales. So it was like a great story, because it was like, wow, it was like super cool tech and some great engineering and design, but it was also like creating a new revenue stream for them. It helped them differentiate their business on a strategic level, help them be really a lot more successful. And so like when we could help our investors understand those stories and what kind of impact technology could have on these different companies if it's thought about in that kind of product-led way, then they understood it. They got excited. And they're like, oh yeah, well, every company's got something like that. And it's like, yeah, every company needs to become a software company if they want to be successful. And then it's like, oh wait, I get it now. Like, okay. And so those stories, which are, same stories we're telling other clients and the same stories we're telling employees to get them excited to come work here or get excited about the work that's going on in other parts of the business. They're all the same stories. So that was the key, is just making sure that message was consistent.
And that's great if you've got the stories, right? If you've got the evidence and case studies. What about if we rewind in your career and we talk about the earlier days when you were starting out on your own and you were, well, I don't really know how it works. Were you pitching to clients and investors at the same time in parallel, or did you have to do one before the other? How did that work and how did those pitches sound?
Yeah, so I never took on money. So I bootstrapped the business, which means that we never took any outside investment until we sold it. And that wasn't necessarily because I was determined not to do that. I just didn't know how. Like I was just an engineer. I wasn't a finance guy. Like I didn't know how to raise money. I didn't think anyone would want to give me any money. Like, but in hindsight, it's great. I mean, it worked out better. That it maybe took a little longer than probably other firms that take outside capital to scale. So by no means am I opposed to that, but allowed us to stay in control for a lot longer. So yeah, I mean, most of the pitching was done to clients. And, I think, different points in time, we had to, as the firm evolved, we had to kind of take different tactics. One of the pivots that we made around 2009 was to focus purely on mobile. That was probably one of the bigger bets that we made that really paid off and helped the company scale. And so it was 2009, the App Store had just launched. So the iPhone had been out for a little over a year. When the App Store launched, we looked at them like, this is going to be the future of how people actually engage with software. And so we made the decision, we're going all in on mobile. And we had it was like 5% of our business at the time. Like we got to be different. We're going all in on mobile. That's all we're going to do. And we didn't have a ton of case studies at the time because there just weren't a lot of case studies.
Right.
And so what we did was we're like, we need to become experts in the technology and the craft. And we need to explain to our clients like how this stuff works. And by explaining to them how it works and by willing to train their people, we'll be looked at as the experts. And if and when they decide they're going to commission a project in this area, they're going to come to us first. And so that was really what we did. We said, okay, we're going to be the experts. We're going to put on classes. We're going to invite our clients to send their engineers to our classes and teach them how to code iPhone apps. We're doing our little side projects on the side and whatever little piddly like POCs that people were funding at the time. We were getting all that work because we were the only ones doing it. And then all of a sudden those projects got bigger because, it became more important and the case studies got more expansive and more critical and more interesting. And then it kind of fed from there. And we had the stories to tell. But I think, when it comes to, when you're working for a firm, running a services firm, whatever it is, like you've got to be really clear on those points of differentiation. And I talk a lot about blue ocean and red ocean. I'm a big believer in kind of the blue ocean and red ocean markets.
So for those people who may not have ever heard that expression, talk us through the basics of red ocean, blue ocean.
It's just like it sounds. So like blue ocean being, relatively untapped market. Maybe it's a new market. It's an emerging market. There's not a lot of competition. Maybe not as many fish in the water, but like less people going after those fish. So it's blue, it's open. There's a lot of white space. Red ocean is kind of the opposite. It's when things start getting commoditized. Maybe it's still a big market. Maybe there's a lot of fish in it, but there's just tons of sharks. There's tons of competition. There's blood in the water because of all this competition happening. And I think, a lot of times companies will start in that blue ocean and use that to kind of define themselves. And then, whatever that market is ultimately starts to become commoditized. I mean, if it's that good and interested in growing, more people are going to come into it. It turns into a red ocean. And, if you don't have a clear sense of differentiation in the red ocean, like you're dead. I mean, so what I always challenged this with was like, every year we're going to create a new service line in a blue ocean. Not all of them are going to go. we're not going to get every bet right, but every year we're going to do something in a blue ocean. And so what, we did everything from like, we started an Internet of Things service line to we did a service line in robotics at one point, which was really fun, but then just market was not quite there yet. We did, we were one of the first to jump on voice and voice experiences, which turned into kind of the modern day kind of chatbot kind of experiences. Ultimately, we started kind of a cloud data practice there, and then our cloud modernization practice started there. But some of those bets have now become a majority of the firm's revenue. Some of them didn't go very far, but the point was, like, we were always fishing, and we're always mining in the red oceans, sure, but always investing in a blue ocean area.
So I assume you knew that you weren't going to catch fish every time. You had a, what was it, 50-50 probability rating? What was the kind of success ratio of trying these completely new, untested things?
I'd say probably half of them ended up going and are still there today, is probably right. But the point was budgeting for it, right? So it's like a lot of services firms don't have an R&D budget. And when you don't have an R&D budget, you're just, you're not investing in the future. And so what ends up happening is you're just incrementally innovating in those areas you're playing in, but you're not ever getting access to any blue ocean. So, we were always good about making sure that we were carving out that investment, which really dictates kind of those 2-3 year down the line, what does a firm look like? And, and inevitably the same thing happened in mobile. I mean, mobile was hot, man. We were one of the first ones there. We took off with that wave, but, fast forward 4 or 5 years later, and it was bloody. It was, everybody was in it. All the Accentures and the, Cognizants and all these guys had their mobile practices built up, and they had thousands and thousands of people doing this stuff. And, we could still differentiate because of the great stories we had, but it was clear, like, okay, we can't just plan to hitch our cart to this forever and just think it's always going to be there. So, even when you hit one that that was like a lottery ticket, like, it's not going to last forever.
So how do you continue to differentiate when your blue ocean turns red? Do you think it is, your case studies and talking about your achievements, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different avenues as it becomes more, I don't even want to say commoditized, because I think there's very few areas in tech services that are totally commoditized. It's just more like mature, it's a more mature market. But I mean, you can differentiate on sector expertise, and clients really value that. So we had 5 key sectors that we were focused on. And so we only marketed and sold to those 5 sectors because, we wanted to build up case studies that, kind of fit into one of those 5 buckets, which made more compelling stories over time. And clients really value that sector expertise when you're in a mature market. When it's an immature market, they value the craft. They value the skills, right? In a blue ocean, they just want people that know how to do this stuff so they can run some experiments and start understanding it themselves. When it's a red ocean, they really value understanding and how those use cases apply to their specific industry, to their specific business. So that's definitely one way to do it. You can continue to differentiate on craft. It just becomes harder. And so you have to be more bold in how you're doing that, whether it's your senior leaders writing books on it or putting conferences on that focus in those areas. I mean, there's, the partnerships that you ultimately form with outside kind of software companies or cloud companies, and how you're viewed by those partners. Those are all ways to continue to differentiate your business. But still, at some point, no one really, I mean, I hate to say it, like, no one cares about firms that implement SAP anymore. Like, it's like, they were they're a high flying in the 90s, and everybody wanted to work for one, and everybody, you couldn't, everybody wanted to invest in them and all that stuff. But there's a point where the technology just wanes.
Another thing in relation to all of that, which is a favorite topic of mine, because I see people doing it wrong all the time. And something I know you talk about is actually being picky with the customers you choose to pitch to and kind of allow to buy your services, right? It's not a case. Success isn't going after everything and trying to win everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I learned that lesson kind of part of that mobile wave. Like when we all of a sudden we became, the mobile people that everybody was going to, then all of a sudden it was like, oh, wow, like we got all these people. And, then you realize, wait, there's good clients and bad clients.
Right.
And there's clients that we can actually build this business on top of. And there's clients that we can't. And I think I'll give you our example of like, where that kind of evolved over time, but every business is different. So for example, like, we decided to stop working for startups because, startups would come in, would be super interesting, right? Because it would always be a greenfield project that you're starting from scratch. You could use the latest tech, like all the engineers, designers love working on startup projects. And, usually it'd have some very enthusiastic founder that, would have this vision and it's compelling. And so they're interesting projects. And, there's always money at the beginning to kind of get these things going. But, as you might guess, it's like, well, the future of those things are questionable. Like, are they going to make it? Do they get that next round of funding? Are they going to take off? Like, you can't really easily rely on them unless you just have a constant funnel of them coming in. You just can't rely on them to build a business on top of, like you could an enterprise, like in a larger enterprise, who typically, projects maybe aren't quite as interesting. You're dealing with some legacy technologies. It's like whatever, but you can actually build a business on top of them. But there's, for us, like there was a size limit to that too. I mean, I remember there was a point in time a few years ago that our East Coast team got us into this huge global bank. And we were so excited because it was like one of these companies that spent billions on IT every year, So it was like the golden goose, like, oh my gosh, like went through the MSA process took like the master services agreement process took like 6 months just to get a contract signed. Like that's how big it was. But once you had that, it's like, oh man, this is like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. We're going in with the MSA or going there. And, we had an executive sponsor in there that was going to hire us for the first project. So obviously we had some work to do. We get in there and there was a global consulting firm in there that had 45 people selling on that account. That's all they did. Just selling that account. Just that account. Like a sales team of 45 people. Like that's how big this company was, right? It was distributed. It was all over the world, all these different business units. And it was like, and I'm like, and we had like one person on the account. You know what I mean? It's like, look at this poor guy. And it's like, it is just like, oh my God, like where do I even start? And then you just realize there are companies that are too big. Yeah. Depending on your size and our size. I mean, we were relatively, we were probably 1,000 people at times. Like still, it's like, it's, you've got to figure out where that sweet spot is for you, where you could get access to the appropriate decision makers to understand where they're going, to hopefully help influence to some degree, to be able to co-solution these things together, to be able to navigate across an organization. Like there is kind of a balance point there. And so we found that, right? We figured out where that was for us. And then we figured out the sectors, and then we were able to target, companies at those size, at those sectors, these specific titles that typically hold these budgets, and then we could put messaging together and all that, account-based marketing, all that stuff. But it took a while to figure that out.
Yeah, because even with I've been involved as well in a couple of kind of David and Goliath pitches where I've been David, and you can win them, but then you got to be really careful about, can you deliver what you promised in the pitch afterwards? Yeah. If you're competing against such a, someone who obviously can.
Yeah. I mean, and I've seen that as well, like where you just get overwhelmed by their infrastructure, their processes, the bureaucracies, those sorts of things. And yeah, you've obviously got to be clear on the scope of what you're being asked to do and that you can do it. But yeah, I mean, I just think that's an important part of any business's sales strategy, is really being crystal clear on who that ideal client profile is. And then having a process for, if you do step outside of it, being very clear on why, and then how that's going to be governed and monitored differently, so it doesn't run away from you. And I've seen that. I've seen the downsides of not having that governance in place.
You mentioned the Discover story yesterday. What's that one?
Yeah, so that was a pivotal pitch for us. And so this was one of those like early mobile days where we were just like tinkering around with all these pilot projects. We're building up capabilities. I think we got the firm to like 65 people, 50, 60 people around this time. And we got like a blind call in from the website. And we thought it was a joke. It was one of these like...
They normally are.
It's like, writing from Discover. We need a partner to help us rewrite our entire mobile suite of applications from the ground up, because they had put something out there, and it was one of those worst case scenarios where there's like, mobile banking was one of the first things to actually go, like legitimate things on the App Store to go from an enterprise perspective. And so they had like a couple million users and like 1-star reviews. Like it was really bad.
Right.
So it was bad scene. So they were like, okay, well, let's do this right. So they reached out and said, we're interested in having you, pitch to take on this whole mobile program. And I don't remember the exact amount, but it was like millions of dollars, which was big for us at the time. Like it was big deal. And so we put all hands on deck. It was like, okay, like if we get this, like it is going to change the firm overnight. Like this was one of those things that was going to double the size of the firm overnight. It was like the firm was small enough at the time where you can kind of fit everybody in one room. It was like this call came in, you might get tapped on the shoulder for something. Like you can't let whatever you're doing slip, but just understand that if we get this, it's going to be great for all of us. And here's what it means. And so please like try to find the time to help if you can. And so everyone was excited, like, all right, let's do it. And so we got in there, and they had their kind of IT team and the business team, and we had to sell them both because they were both stakeholders for it. And so the IT team was like, we did all the craft stuff, right? And they loved it because they're like, oh my God, like, look, it's like clean code and like nice, all these, nice mobile DevOps no one else is talking about. And it was like all these things and then the business side was just like, not impressed, not impressed. And, they're sitting in our little office, in the corner of the West Loop in Chicago, in this loft building. We had like this boardroom table with this like hand-me-down, like, a terrible wood boardroom table, and they're all sitting there. And I got the story later, like the head of the business side was like texting the head of the IT side, like, there's no chance that we're going to go with these guys. Like during our pitch, he's writing this. And the reason I know that, by the way, is because obviously we ended up, we'll kind of get to the story, but he became one of our biggest advocates. I think he's gone on and working for other companies and has brought us in, become a very good friend and a great advocate. So, but at the time, he was not impressed. Like we weren't, we didn't have that business side pitch down. But the IT side like went to bat for us and said, listen, I think these guys are exactly what we need. They kind of stuck their neck out, so we'll make sure that it works. And so the business side kind of begrudgingly went along, and we won half of the deal. And in the half of the deal, basically what they said was, we're going to let you rebuild the iPhone app. We're going to have our current vendor rebuild the Android app. And so they're kind of, just like had a foot in both camps to like, not put all their eggs in one basket, because we were small. I mean, you're 55 people. This is a multi-billion-dollar organization, and this is a critical thing for them. And what they told us, what sold it for them, actually, like where we got half the deal, and I'll tell the second half of the story in a second. But they brought us in for a final pitch, and there were other boutiques that they were talking to that were kind of pitching at the same time. And the final meeting, we went to their offices in Riverwoods, and we brought the team that was going to work on their account, every leader of every team. And we had each person stand up, and it was like, I'll never forget. It was like our lead designer like stood up and it's just like, my name's Jess. I'm going to lead the design effort. I've done these things so far. This is what I envision for what we need to do here. Like, she introduced herself in context of like, I'm going to be your person for design. I am going to be your person for QA. I'm going to be your lead engineer. I am going to be your, Scrum master. I'm going to be your program. And then went around the table and discovers like looking at all these folks. They're all great people. I mean, we're all pretty young at the time, but I mean, like clearly knew their shit, clearly like were ready, clearly cared. And that's what they told us later is that's what won it. Like we came in, they're like, okay, this is the team. This is the team. If you give it to us today, this is the team. And they're like, all right, let's go.
And that's often what the bigger consultancies and agencies lack, because they know they're either going to bring their A team to the pitch and then get them to go to the next pitch and the next pitch and sub them out, or they're going to offshore it or nearshore it. And
yeah, well, I think when you're small, like the nimbleness and the agility and the control that you have are like your biggest assets, right? You don't have as many moving pieces, so you can control them better. And you got to use that, right? I mean, you've got to use that to your advantage. And I'm in the room, right? I'm the CEO and I'm like, yeah, this is your team. Like there's no one else that's going to take them away from you. I am here telling you this is your team. You can't do that when you're, necessarily 60,000 and 100,000 people or do that as easily.
Well, I mean, you struggle to get the CEO in a room. I mean, there's not many pitches that Arvind will turn up for IBM, for example.
Yeah.
Which is understandable, but yeah.
Time in their day. Yeah, no, for sure. But that's what got it. So, so then fast forward. And so then the second half of that story was, I think was my favorite part. And that is, we started and it didn't start off great. I mean, because we had to ramp the team quickly, and we were small and we didn't necessarily like have our shit together for something at this scale. And so it was kind of like rickety and we were hiring all these and there weren't a lot of people out there that knew like how to build iPhone apps, in 2010 or whatever this was. So like it was, we're ramping people up, we're training people up, like all this stuff. And the client came to us and was like, listen, I see the potential here, but it's not going great. We're going to give you guys a milestone. And it was like 3 months away. And if you don't hit it, it's going to be over. Like we can't just wait for you to grow up. Like,
right.
Kind of like laid the gauntlet down. Gave the other team that we were competing against, like the ones building the Android app, the same challenge, to their credit. So they kind of, the guy that did this is just brilliant. The client that did this, I have a lot of respect for him. So he's still a close friend today. But I remember that, and it was like holy shit, this is really it. Like we got 3 months to figure this out, and if it was like everything was riding on it. And we brought everyone back together. And I remember like we were all sitting in the same room together. And I did two things. One, I told the story of 300. You remember the movie 300?
Yeah.
About, but it was like the Spartans against the Persians, and it was the Battle of Thermopylae. And I'll probably get the history a little bit wrong here, but the story was there was like this pass that the Persian Empire needed to go through in order to get to Greece, and the Spartans went to go defend the pass with like 300. There was like 300 Spartans, and then the legend goes there's like it's like a 1,000,000-man army of the Persians. So these 300 people held out this narrow pass, and they held it off for a certain number of days or a week or whatever it was, but it was enough time so like Athens could come in and the Greeks could all get their stuff together and then ultimately ward off the attack. But these 300 people basically battled this 1,000,000-man army and won, or at least won that battle enough that ultimately the war was won. And so I was like, this is kind of what we're dealing with, like we're this little band of like, 55, 65 people. And we've got this competitor that's hundreds of thousands of people. And we're both tasked with doing the same thing. And the only way we're going to win is if we have each other's backs. Because the Spartans did this thing where they would like hold the shield in front of the person next to them. So they could like then then like focus on using their spears, and they kind of created this wall of shields, and that's kind of how they held these guys off. But it was all about like protecting the person next to them in order for them to kind of form this this phalanx or whatever they called it. And so we talked about that. We talked about the principles of servant leadership and the fact that this was going to be really hard, and there was going to be times where people were like really stressed and strained, and we need to understand where they are and like help those people, get them through it. Like the same thing that we talked about with the constraints earlier. And as a team, like we were going to be able to do this, but only if we like stuck together. And so, and around that same time, there was a brilliant developer that we had hired that had pulled me aside and said, the team's too green. They're never going to do it. He's like, but I think I could do this myself. I could build this whole thing myself if you just let me work by myself at my house, heads down. I do nothing else. I will work 20 hours a day. I know I can do it. And he probably could. Like he was that good. But I'm like, if we have him do that, then, and we might even get past this 3 months, but we're not going to have a firm. We're not going to really have won anything. We'll be in the same place. And so, but his ultimatum was, let me do it this way or I'm leaving, because I don't think we can do it the other way. And so ultimately I told him, look, we're going to do it the right way. And he left. And then we did this meeting. And so we talked about the Battle of Thermopylae. And then the other carrot I gave everyone was, and if we pull this off, we're all going to Mexico. Like all of us are going to go. I don't know when, we're all going to go. And so that was the other like carrot, like, cause it's going to suck. I know it's going to suck. And, man, the team did it. Like they freaking nailed it. Like absolutely nailed it. And it was one of the highlights of my career, just watching these people come together and the leaders that kind of emerged out of that group, many of which are still leading the firm today. Now that it's 2,000 people, and we crushed it. And that client, we're doing almost 20 to 50 times as much revenue with them today as we were in that first project. So like it's just grown into this great story that started with a pitch, but really was about, a firm growing up in the face of an incredible challenge. And I'll always thank the client for allowing us that opportunity. Always.
What a great story. That is so going to be a video highlight. It was the best, man. That was like, that was one of my favorite moments for sure. But also classic you being humble. You played a big role in that. Like it's difficult to be in that leadership position and say no to the guy who says, I've got the answer for you. I've got it. It's in my hand. And you still say no. That's courage.
It was. I mean, I'm not going to, the effort that everyone on that team had to go through to get that done was, that decision paled in comparison to what ultimately they had to do. But yeah, I was one of those moments where I felt like, thank God we did the right thing, because those are defining moments for companies, and companies have defining moments just like teams do, and just like families do, and like all of us as individuals do. So it was great having to go through that. And what's interesting too, and I used to have this ritual where I would sit down with everyone we would like do like a birthday lunch for everyone that had a birthday that week. And we would kind of like just all have lunch together and tell stories and stuff. And one of the questions I would ask everyone was like, give me your best memory of the last year. Like, give me your favorite memory of the last year. It could be personal and professional, whatever. Just like share it. Like, it was just a good way for everyone to get to know each other. But what's really surprising is like when you go around the table, it was almost always those really challenging projects that people would bring up. It was like those really hard things that sucked while you're going through them, And then they get to the other side of them, and then people would be like, yeah, I'm just like so proud we did that. And I'm so glad I did that. And I'm so proud of how we did that. And it was like, those were the best stories, but it was very surprising to me. Like, I would say 75% of the time, it was a memory of something that sucked. Was their like favorite memory of the last year? which,
Wow.
says something about us as humans, I think.
Humans love conflict. I'm always saying this. And this is why you don't get any movies where nothing bad happens. And why reality TV is forced into corners of, terrible situations that the producers set up.
I think humans love growth. And I think it's hard to find growth without some level of conflict, whether it's within yourself or outside. But we thrive on growth. It's really hard to find fulfillment if you're not growing, I think.
And have you got any advice looking back on your career on the things that most helped you to grow?
I mean, you immediately go to people. I just think, a lot of times it's others that kind of push us out of our comfort zones. So, I gave the example of my wife, Gina. She continues to do that for me today. I've had a mentor for many years, this guy, David Bell, who, very similar story, like built up a firm, sold it, ran the parent, eventually ran Interpublic Group for a number of years, like just kept moving up. And he's probably one of the most humble, caring, empathetic leaders I've ever met. And just seeing him as like an example of someone that could be incredibly successful and still be kind and giving and, just a good person. Cause there's a lot of leaders out there you can look at are just like, kind of like, oh, like that person's an asshole. It's like, but, and maybe their brashness or boldness or ego got them to a certain place. But when you can find someone like that, that's just like, no, they're just great. And it's great to have those role models and someone you could call, like I would with him, to sense check, like, am I thinking about this right? Is this the right thing to do? Like, is there other ways I should be thinking about it? So having those people, I think are,
how'd you find those people?
David, I found, I was at a networking event, and this was around 2013. And somebody asked me who was on my advisory board at Solstice. And I said, I don't have an advisory board. Like who's going to want to be on a, 120 person firm, software engineering firm's advisory board. And they'd be like, and they said, you know what, you'd be surprised. Like, let me give you a challenge. Like, think of like 4 people that you would love to have on your advisory board, whether you know them or not, and just call them and ask them. And the worst they can say is no. Just call them and ask them. And I went home that night and I wrote down 4 people, some of whom I kind of knew and a couple that I had never even met. And David Bell was one of them. And I called all 4 of them and said, look, I'm looking to form an advisory board. I don't really have a lot of cash, but I can give you a small little piece of equity in the business. If you'd meet with me once a quarter, me and my executive team, for a half day once a quarter, and just help us figure out like how to get to the next level. And all of them said yes, every single one of them. And they were great. They stayed with us all the way through the sale, through the earnout. David is still on the public company board of Kin Carta today. And it was like, those little moments where someone just pushes you, like, just go ask. Okay.
Right. It's so obvious. Yeah.
It's so obvious. Yeah. But I mean, it was one thing I learned is like, I was just shit at asking for help.
Yeah.
And I've learned through him that like, asking for help is a bidirectional gift. I mean, you're getting a gift in whatever guidance or, advice you're getting back, but you're also giving the person you're asking a gift, because by them being able to share their experiences and wisdom with you, it's like, that is a treat. That's how legacy is formed. That's why I'm talking about David Bell right now for 10 minutes. I mean, it's like, it's a gift. So I firmly believe that. And anytime someone reaches out to me, is like, hey, I know you don't know me, but like, I'd love to talk to you about this or that or the other thing. It's like, sure, set up a time. I mean, it's not that hard, I guess, once you learn that you can to start asking.
So you've fairly recently stepped away from the Kin Carta and left your legacy there, no longer the CEO. What's going on with you now? What are the big plans in your future?
Yeah, So in last August, I handed the baton over to Kelly Manthe, who has been with me for almost all the journey. So I'm like very, very excited and happy for her. And so I have started another firm called The Second Mountain. And my goal with The Second Mountain is to invest in and coach founders of early stage tech services companies. So one of the ways that we're doing that and kind of getting the word out there is I've put together a masterclass, which is basically going to be 10 episodes of like the top 10 things I've learned on how to scale a services firm. So for agency, founders, tech services founders, consultancies. So that is going on right now. If anyone wants to go subscribe at thesecondmountain.io, so www.thesecondmountain.io, or follow me on LinkedIn, and I'm posting those weekly. I think we're on chapter 4 launching this week. So anyone who's interested, I'd love for you to find it and share it. I'm not charging anything for it. It's just, again, one of those ways, and I'm just trying to give back.
Fantastic. And I always ask the following question. Any final words of wisdom?
Final words of wisdom. We've kind of touched on some principles of this, but I am a big believer in servant leadership. And I feel like it's one of those philosophies that you can practice regardless of what level you are in the organization. I encourage people to read up on it, but the fundamental principle is this: being a great leader is not about being good at your job. It's making other people great at theirs. And that is a principle that I have used to guide me throughout my entire career. It served me very well and served others very well. And I would just leave that as a passing thought.
Well, I got to ask one follow-up question now. What book or books would you recommend people read?
Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, is a great book that talks about the power of being a servant leader and bringing other people up alongside you as you continue to grow in your career. It's a great book.
Jay, thank you so much. I always love talking to you. You've given us so much content. Thank you for being on the show.
Appreciate it, Danny. Looking forward to continuing to listen.
All right. See you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
This has been another episode of Pitch Masters. Go to pitchguy.co.uk for updates and information, or search for Pitch Guy on social media for regular videos on sales, psychology, storytelling, creativity, and much more.